Morning. It's wonderful to be with you all today. Before I start my sermon, I want to begin with these words. Tutti frutti, o Rudy, a whoop bop, a loo bop, a lop bam boom. You get my meaning, right? Oh, you don't? Well, good, because neither do I. I have no clue what I just said. As a matter of fact, Little Richard, who wrote the song Tutti Frutti, of lyrics I've just quoted, I don't think he understood either. That's the thing, when you look or you see lyrics like that, you don't typically think that they have any meaning behind them. It's funny that sometimes when we look at lyrics, we can sometimes, in a song, sometimes we think that they do have some type of profound meaning. Obviously, lyrics like that, we clearly know don't, but sometimes it could be more convincing. And I've found it humorous times where you've talked to the artists and you figure out that they said, I honestly have no clue what I was saying. It just fit in the song, it just worked. And so sometimes what appears to be meaningful and to have meaning actually has none whatsoever. On the other hand, kind of a counterexample, I don't know if you can see on the screen, but kind of behind my title is this background of binary code. When you look at binary code, it really doesn't look that meaningful on the surface. It looks like gibberish. It looks kind of random. But really, binary code is very meaningful. It's very precise in its meaning. So even though it looks like gibberish, it actually has very deep and precise meaning to it. So we have these two extremes of sometimes something can appear to have meaning and not have meaning at all. Sometimes something can appear to not have meaning and then indeed have meaning. This brings us to this very important topic and this very important question, not just important to you and me, but it's important to everyone. Is there real meaning to life without God? Is it something that is necessary? Is God a necessary aspect of life for there to be real meaning? Or can meaning be there, like binary code, without the presence of God? Solomon considered this question throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, and if you do turn over there, we will be getting around to getting to the book of Ecclesiastes, but the main thing that he was considering was whether or not real meaning can be found without God in this life and in this world alone. After searching through and explaining several different things throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, in Ecclesiastes 12:8, he arrives to this statement: meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Important to emphasize that he was considering aspects of this life and if this life is all that there is. So was Solomon's assessment true? Well, we're going to do our own assessment today, looking at the question as, is there real meaning to life without God? But before we start, I want to define some of these terms that are so critical to this type of investigation. First, the term meaning. It has multiple definitions, but the two that we're going to focus on is something that is meant or intended, and then the second one, the end, purpose, or significance of something. What is the outcome, the meaning in terms of the significant outcome of something? The second definition, which this is the most important word probably in this entire sermon, is the word real. Matter of fact, this question is really not a good question to ask if you do not include the word real. And obviously, when I say real, I mean something that existing in fact that's not imaginary. Something can be very real in your mind, but not have anything to do with reality in this material world itself. So we're asking, is there real meaning beyond just the mind, just the individual, is one of the critical aspects of what we're looking at. The last word that I want to draw to your attention is the word accident. By definition, it's an event that is not planned or intended, so it's unintended. An event that occurs by, should say up there, chance. So these are the critical terms that I want to keep in mind as we go along with this investigation. So first thing I want to take a look at is, without God, is there real meaning to the universe? To rephrase the question based on the definitions we just looked at, without God, is the universe meant to be or intended to be? To answer this question, we must begin by asking, in theory, how would a universe exist without God? Scientists and philosophers offer up two potential broad categories of answers for how that would happen. First is the universe came into existence by accident. This would fall under the categories of the Big Bang Theory, of a multiverse theory, and quantum field theories about how the universe could, quote-unquote, spring up spontaneously. Some of the physicists, like Lawrence Krauss, who's a top physicist and one of the top atheists in the world, he talks about this idea of a universe coming into existence by accident, even the laws of physics coming in, as he uses his own words, accident. Stephen Hawking, who needs no introduction whatsoever, he talks about the idea of, once again, a universe coming in spontaneously, accidentally, not intended, unplanned, as you can see up there. The other explanation, which is not that popular because the data does not really support it, is that the universe is eternal and has always existed. There are some physicists who do hold to it, like Paul Steinhardt, but for the most part, people do not hold to that explanation. So I'm beginning this, as I'll explain right here, for this reason. What are the implications of these two explanations that do not include God's involvement in creation? Well, one, without God, the universe is either an accident or has always existed inexplicably. In other words, it's uncaused. It just happens to exist. Well, two, by definition, an accident, as we've already discussed, is something that is unintended, which means by definition has no meaning, because things that have meaning are intended, not unintended. And an uncaused universe that exists without reason is by definition meaningless. So therefore, without God, the universe has no real meaning because it is either an accident that is unintended or it is uncaused and therefore has no inherent meaning. Not only is this conclusion logically inescapable, it's actually acknowledged to be true by many atheists themselves. Quentin Smith, who's considered to be one of the top 5 atheists in the world, says this world exists for absolutely no reason at all. Alex Rosenberg, another top atheist, says, what is the purpose of this universe? There is none. Lawrence Krauss, again, one of the top atheists and physicists in the world, says the universe is the way it is, whether we like it or not. The existence or non-existence of a creator is independent of our desires. A world without God or purpose may seem harsh or pointless, but he acknowledges the correlation between God and purpose for the universe. So by definition, logic, and the admission of many atheists, the universe has no real meaning without God. Now let's break it down one step further. We've talked about the universe, but without God, is there real meaning to life? Same question rephrased. Without God, is life meant to be or intended to be? Well, based on what we've already covered, without God, life is merely a component or a quality of the universe. In other words, it doesn't come from God. It would come from the universe if that is all that there was. So without God, the universe, as we've already discussed, is an accident or uncaused and has no real meaning. Therefore, without God, life has no real meaning, since life will be part of a meaningless universe. Again, this conclusion is both logically necessary, but it is also affirmed by many prominent atheists to be undeniably true. Steven Weinberg, who's considered to be the top physicist in the world and also is an atheist, says it is almost irresistible for humans to believe that we have some special relation to the universe, that human life is not just more or less a farcical outcome of a chain of accidents reaching back to the first 3 minutes. He acknowledges that life itself is nothing more than an accident. Jean-Paul Sartre, who is a famous Nobel Prize winner, also admits life has no meaning. And Alexander Rosenberg, again, who we've already quoted, what is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What is the meaning of life? Ditto. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. And one last quote from a New York Times bestseller, any meaning that people inscribe to their lives is just a delusion. So, the universe and life, does it have real meaning? Well, without God, the universe and life have no real meaning, as evidenced by definition, by logic, and by the admission of many atheist scholars. So without God, real meaning truly is actually just imaginary or delusion. Now, we tackled the first aspect of the definition of meaning, but what about the second one, the one that has to do with outcome? Is there any ultimate significance without God in the picture? as I was talking about, outcome is the central thought behind this particular investigation. Look with me in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to look at chapter 5, verses 15 through 16. And the first thing that I want to bring to your attention from the book of Ecclesiastes is his exploration of, do works and accomplishments have any ultimate significance in the context of this world being all that there is? As it says in Ecclesiastes 5, 15 through 16, as he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. This is also a grievous evil. Exactly as man is born, thus he will die. So what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Also, as he says in Ecclesiastes 2:17, so I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after wind. It's pretty simple. Without God in the picture, everything is going to come to an end. So any work or accomplishment that anybody does here on earth ultimately will be done away with, along with humanity and the universe itself. So that's a pretty simple conclusion, obviously. What about desire or pleasure? In Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 2, Solomon discusses this very topic. It says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? In other words, there's no ultimate purpose to pleasure. It will fade out with humanity as well. But what about if you were to consider the relative significance of pleasure? Some people think pleasure is a good meaning to life to have. Well, Solomon saw other problems with it in the immediate. Like, for example, in Ecclesiastes 1:8, he points out that the eye never gets enough of seeing, the ear never gets enough of hearing. To the very day that people die, if they have those faculties working, they continue to want to be able to see and hear. He talks about hunger, that obviously as long as you're still functioning, you're going to get hungry. He talks about the desire to go back in time to the good times. Where did the good times go? Other things as well that really show that if you make pleasure the central meaning, even if it's only a temporary meaning to life, not in regards to ultimate significance, there's a lot of problems with that, and it really does lead to misery. Because ironically, the pursuit of pleasure as the meaning of life often leads to unpleasurable situations. Numbness to certain pleasures easily occurs, as we all are aware of. Boredom is a common outcome of endlessly pursuing pleasure. If getting pleasure is a personal meaning to life, then the goal of that person's life is to get as much pleasure as possible. But ironically, it's the desire for more pleasure that ultimately can never be satisfied. So when you feed that desire, you are ultimately feeding what will make you miserable. Pleasure is also very elusive when it's pursued directly. It's more of a byproduct than something that you can achieve, you can obtain on your own. And as one gets older, life affords fewer and fewer pleasures. And ironically, pleasure becomes less pleasurable over the course of time. So even relatively speaking, in a temporal significance, pleasure becomes a very pointless pursuit if it becomes the whole of what the meaning of life is. What about memories? Solomon discusses the futility of memories in Ecclesiastes 2:16. He says, for there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. He even discusses in Ecclesiastes 9:14-15 about a wise man who saved an entire city but was quickly forgotten. Even the noble, the greatest people from history are usually forgotten over the course of time. Only a few have the privilege of being remembered long into the future. It's interesting that a lot of people, talk about the idea of people living on through memories. Well, and even forever, but truth be told, that's not what's going to happen if there is no God. That would be an absolute lie that people believed in without the existence of God. Because memories will fade out with humanity, and people do not continue on through those. But how much do people want to believe that? How much do people want to hold on to that? It's a very powerful Very powerful thought, very powerful emotion, and yet it makes no sense outside of the context of God. What about love? In Ecclesiastes 9:6, Solomon discusses love. I think we'd all agree love is considered by most people to be the best and most central aspect of life that we have. As Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 9:6, indeed their love, their hate, and their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. It is a common belief, even amongst those who do not believe in God, that love never dies. Love continues on. Well, without God, love will die with the last person because humanity would be the only source of love without God. And so that, if one believes there is no God, they believe an utter lie if they believe that love continues on after humanity is gone. What about morality? Solomon discusses this topic throughout the book. In Ecclesiastes 2:15 through 16, he says, Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity, and how the wise man and the fool die alike. In other words, the outcome is the same. Whether you were wise in how you conducted your life or whether you're foolish, the outcome is the same. And if there's nothing beyond that, then what is the point? As he also says in Ecclesiastes 7:15, I have seen everything during my lifetime of futility. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness. Again, the outcome for moral living or immoral living is the same without God, and justice is never served. Even as it says in Ecclesiastes 7:15 there, that ultimately the wicked can sometimes even prolong their life through their wickedness, through immorality. And what is the price to pay if you can get away with it in this life? There is no price to pay if you can get away with it in this life. So where's the motivation to not do it if you can get away with it? So without God, we see that accomplishments, pleasure, memories, love, and morality have no ultimate significance. And so I think it's pretty simple, actually, if you think about it, that you can demonstrate that the universe has no real meaning, that life has no real meaning, and that there's no ultimate significance because everything's going to be done away with. Those are pretty simple points. You know what the common response is from people who want to cling on to meaning? You know what they say? So what? Whatever. We can make our own meaning. How's about that? We can make our own truth. So, that's often the atheist solution to the idea of a meaningless life and universe, is let's make our own meaning then. As Lawrence Krauss said, we should provide the meaning of the universe in the meaning of our own lives. Richard Dawkins, another famous atheist, said, our life is as meaningful and as full as wonderful as we choose to make it. And John Paul Sartre also, in similar tones, said, life has no meaning. It is up to you to give it meaning, and value is nothing but the meaning that you choose. Okay, so they're talking about relative meaning. We're not talking about real meaning anymore. We've already shown that through the evidence that there is no such thing as real meaning in this universe without God. There's no real meaning to life without God. But what about relative meaning? Is there anything that's wrong with relative meaning? Well, what would be the sources of relative meaning within the absence of God? The first explanation would be social evolution. Without God, the theory of evolution, and if the theory of evolution was true, social evolution alone would be how we obtained our relative sense of meaning. Now, once again, a lot of times the response is, well, so what? Why is this a problem? Well, I think you might as well consult Charles Darwin on why this is a problem. Matter of fact, he saw the issue with the sense of morality by his own observations of the animal world. I'll go ahead and read a quote from him. It's a little lengthy, but I think it's worth reading because it's straight from the horse's mouth. I do not wish to maintain that any strict social animal, if it were to become as highly developed as man, would acquire exactly the same moral sense as ours. They might have a sense of right and wrong, though led by it to follow widely different lines of conduct. He gives an example. If men were reared as hive bees, unmarried females would think it their sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. This is from his book, the descent of man. Think about that admission. He's saying that basically there's a lot of different social interactions throughout the animal kingdom. We could have had a completely different one, and therefore there's no real foundation for saying anything is right versus wrong. It's all just a random process of evolutionary development. So we see that it doesn't leave you with the grounds for really condemning any behavior at all. It leaves you without a foundation. Consider also the fact, another common belief. Most people believe that animals do not have moral obligations. For example, nobody wants to put in jail a lion for eating an antelope. Animal males kill each other in competition for a mating partner. Hyenas steal food from other animals, and chimpanzees sometimes cannibalize each other in tribal warfare. Do any of these creatures get held as morally accountable? Absolutely not. But all these actions are considered morally wrong for humans, but are not considered morally wrong for animals. But the truth is, if evolution is true, humans are just highly developed animals, and by that logic, humans would also have no moral obligation. So once again, where is the foundation for saying anything is right or wrong? If it is just based purely in social evolution, you are left without a foundation and just the admonition that right and wrong is purely fictitious. The only law of evolution is what you can do, not what you must do. We see this principle played out in survival of the fittest. It doesn't matter, you have no social obligations or you have no moral obligations whatsoever. It's only what you can do and what is best for your survival. That's the only thing that the theory of evolution really teaches. And so, therefore, you're left without any type of moral obligation or foundation. And that's a dangerous grounds for anyone, a believer in God or not, to rest their meaning on. But with God, the origin of our sense of moral obligation that is unique from other creatures is explainable and logical, contrary to social evolution. Job 35:11 says, "Who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the heavens?" Meaning, God instills in us understanding, a sense of meaning. It makes sense for a being with meaning to be able to instill that. It's a logical explanation. Two, another source that we would gather relative meaning from would be group or popular thinking. One of the initial problems is there is no agreed upon universal moral code, and group thinking often leads to conflict between groups. And no one sincerely believes that relative meaning of different groups leads to peace and morality on earth. We've seen too many examples to the contrary. Group thinking as a basis for meaning has produced horrid social conventions like oppression, slavery, racism, cannibalism, human sacrifices, eugenics, and modern tribalism. These are all things that are produced, the product of groups of societies deciding that they found these social constructs to be meaningful. Group thinking is no objective basis for morality and does not produce harmony. If each society has the right to determine for themselves what they find meaningful, relatively speaking, then it is baseless to condemn these practices as wrong. In other words, if that is how we decide, that is what determines morality, is just group thinking, then if a group thinks differently, you have no grounds for condemning them if that is the foundation for determining relative morality. These things, as horrible as they are, you would be left without a foundation for showing why any of them are wrong. Even Steven Pinker admits this. He's one of the top atheists and a top psychologist in the world. He says, now, if the distinction between right and wrong is also a product of brain wiring, it would be through an evolutionary process, why should we believe it is any more real than the distinction between red and green? And if it's just a collective hallucination, how can we argue that evils like genocide and slavery are wrong for everyone rather than just distasteful for us? In other words, if it's just a random process that produces moral sense, how do you say that it is truly wrong in the grand scheme of things for this or that? You have no objective mechanism for determining that, is Steven Pinker's point. And once again, a very amazing admonition on his part. But with God, group thinking is rejected as a basis for meaning and for morality. Look at what it says in Exodus 23:2. It says, "You shall not follow the masses in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after a multitude in order to pervert justice." So we see that following mass thinking, if it is in the wrong direction, God explicitly says this is not a grounds for determining what to do, whether it is right or wrong. It's explicitly called out in Scripture as not a grounds to do that. And that is consistent with what we know to be true, which is the masses do not always do what is moral. Therefore, you should have a standard that says, I'm not going to blindly follow the masses to determine my morality. And yet, when you subscribe social thinking or group thinking as a grounds for relative meaning, then ultimately you are left with no way of saying that people should not just follow what everyone else is doing and determine their own moral construct. Last, we see the most fundamental source for relative thinking would be individual thought itself. A lot of people say, shouldn't every person be allowed to determine their own meaning to life? Don't we all just want essentially the same things out of life anyway? I like what Bertrand Russell, the Nobel Prize winner and atheist, said. He said, it's obvious to begin with that the whole idea of good and bad has some connection with desire. On face value, anything that we all desire is good, and anything that we all dread is bad. If we all agreed in our desires, the matter could be left there, but unfortunately, our desires conflict. If I say what I want is good, my neighbor will say, no, what I want. Often humans are only as good, this is another problem, as society rewards them for being good. A stable society often serves as a buffer between conflicting individual meanings. Remove that buffer and watch what happens when meaning becomes individualistic. One of my favorite movies is Gone with the Wind, and there's this great example of this very point here. It's the movie, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is the fall of the South, and Scarlett O'Hara and her family lived in absolute luxury where doing whatever they wanted to do was easy, and when they went from that to abject poverty into on the verge of hunger, at the intermission in the movie, Scarlett O'Hara says this, as God's my witness, they're not going to lick me. I'm going to live through this, and when it's all over, I'll never be hungry again. No, nor any of my folk. If I have to lie, steal, cheat, or kill, as God's my witness, I'll never be hungry again. Ironic, I wouldn't want to invoke God in that statement, but she chose to. And it's interesting that how quickly things can crumble if morality is not grounded in transcendent principle. In other words, if morality is only based in circumstances and convenience, the moment those circumstances change, the moment it's no longer convenient, is the moment things like this happen, where you're willing to do anything, compromise anything, as long as it is in the pursuit of pursuing your own individual meaning and your own individual means over everything else. And the truth is, we saw that happen also. For those of you familiar with the book of Judges, that's exactly what happens. It says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. How dark the last passages, the last chapters of Judges are. Just horrid stories of where people were doing what they thought was right in their own eyes. And it really was anarchy, which anarchy is the uninhibited product of relative individual meaning. In other words, when there's no buffer, no government, no societal structure to keep it in check, that's what happens. When individual meaning takes precedence, anarchy rules if there is nothing to check it. And many countries in the world today experience just that. We are lucky where we live in a society that rewards moral behavior on several levels, not always, as we all know, but more so than other countries. There are countries where moral behavior is not rewarded and where it's easier to put individual relative meaning above everyone else. And so we need to understand this. As easy as we have it, there's a lot of countries that do not have it where it's convenient to be moral. But with God, individualistic meaning is rejected, and selfless objective morality is upheld. As we're all familiar with Leviticus 19:18, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This moral meaning is not based on convenience or circumstance. It's irregardless of those things. It is the greatest agent of practical human harmony the world has ever seen. To this day, moral codes are being built around the principle, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You see, the issue with relative meaning is that the possible sources for it offer no basis for human harmony or objective morality. Social evolution offers no foundation for moral obligation. Group thinking leads to conflicting groups' disharmony and popularity determining morality, which we've seen many examples throughout history of how that has gone horribly wrong. And last, individual thought as a basis for relative meaning results in selfishness and a morality of convenience and utility, as opposed to morality that transcends circumstance and is based on principles that are not subject to change. Now, here's a very important question, and really, this is why the word real is so important. When you're asking the question, without God, is there real meaning to life? If you acknowledge that there's no real meaning to life without God, and you say, I'm just going to live my own relative meaning, this is the important question. Is it possible to live a life of relative meaning? Put simply, the answer is no. Here's why. Everyone lives as if their personal meanings, moral and otherwise, are actually significant in reality. People may admit that without God, meaning is relative and not real, but they still live as if their own meaning to life is real. For example, anytime anyone morally claims, you are wrong, that is right, that is good, all such claims are claims that there is real meaning and objective morality. The moment you say, I live my own relative meaning, but make these statements is the moment that you are a hypocrite to what you say you believe. All absolute statements express the idea of real meaning, and everybody says such things and believes such things. It's actually unlivable. And Christopher Hitchens, a prominent atheist, admits this. He said, it could be that all existence is a pointless joke, but it is not in fact possible to live one's everyday life as if this were so. It's not possible. You have to live a lie if you believe that everything, all meaning is relative. Dr. L.D. Rue mentioned the idea of a noble lie. He said, we need this noble lie. A noble lie is one that deceives us, tricks us, compels us to think beyond self-interest, beyond ego, beyond family, nation, and race. Without such lies, we cannot live. He's saying, you have to lie to yourself about reality. You have to say, no, these things are real, these things matter, in order for things to work out good. But yet, where is the foundation? There is no foundation. Steven Weinberg, once again, the top physicist in the world, says it is almost irresistible for humans to believe that we have some special relationship to the universe. In other words, it's not just my relative meaning, that I actually am significant in the universe, that what I think and what I do and what I say is significant. It's more than just inside my head. So everyone lives life as if it has real meaning, but without God, real meaning is nothing more than a delusion or a fiction of the mind. Our sense and longing for meaning is inexplicable without God, which leads us to this last and very important question. Is there real meaning to life with God? Solomon answers this question in the affirmative, going back to some of the things that we looked at, tackling first works and accomplishments. In Ecclesiastes 9:1, he says, "For I have taken all this to my heart and explain it that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God." In other words, the good that is done here on earth for those who are right and doing what's right, God holds on to it, and it has ultimate significance beyond this world. What about pleasure and desire? I love what it says in Psalm 16:11. It says, "You will make known to me the path of life. Your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever." That pleasure that cannot be quenched here on earth, it is quenchable in the eternal with God. What about love? Psalms 103:17 says, "But the loving kindness of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting." With God, love truly never dies. It just seems so wrong to people to think about the idea of love dying. How can that be? Well, maybe it seems so wrong is because it is so wrong. Because there is God, and God has loving kindness that is from everlasting to everlasting. What about morality? In Ecclesiastes 3:16 through 17, Solomon observed this under the sun. He says, "Furthermore, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man, for a time for every matter and for every deed is there." In other words, there will be a time when everything that goes wrong, everything wrong that is done here will be set right. That's exactly what he says again in Ecclesiastes 12:13 through 14, where he said this: the conclusion when all has been heard is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. With God, morality does matter and has ultimate significance and consequences, both in the present and the future, both positive and negative, and it has real meaning, not fictional meaning. Also, real meaning with God, we can see that God offers a cohesive explanation of the origin of meaning itself. Job 32:8 says, "But it is the spirit in a man and the breath of the Almighty that gives them understanding." In other words, God endows meaning and understanding into humanity. The idea that a meaningless universe can instill meaning is absolutely ridiculous. It is a simple fact. The inanimate material of the universe has never been shown to produce consciousness or a sense of meaning. That is a simple fact. However, when you include God in the picture, meaning makes sense. A meaningful God can instill meaning. He is meaningful himself, and he has the sufficient power in order to instill meaning. It is an explanation that has explanatory power, as opposed to the alternative, which has no explanatory power and no logic behind it. Last, real meaning with God gives real hope. In Job 27:8, Job thought about, for what is the hope of the godless when he is cut off? The answer is none. There is none. No hope without God. But we know that with God, there is hope. I love what it says in Titus 3:4 through 7. But when the kindness of God, our Savior, and his love for mankind appeared, he saved us, not on the basis of deeds which we have done in righteousness, but according to his mercy, by the washing of regeneration and renewing by the Holy Spirit, whom he poured out upon us richly through Jesus Christ our Savior, so that being justified by his grace, we would be made heirs according to the hope of eternal life. Through God, there is hope. There is salvation. Through the washing of regeneration, through baptism, what he does by his power when we approach him through faith. The verse that I had as the scripture reading was Acts 5:20. I love the way the NASB renders that verse. It talks about speak to the people the whole message of this life, the whole meaning and purpose of why we are here. We see that only with God is there real meaning. Only with God is there real purpose, a significance beyond this world, which is disappearing before our very eyes. If you do not have real meaning with God yet through his son Jesus, then there is nothing more important than you making that decision. You will always have an opportunity with us to talk about putting on Christ in baptism and learning what it means to be a follower of Christ as he calls you to be. If you need to seek God again to bring forward anything that is weighing on your heart, you have that opportunity now as well. And I want to always emphasize that it's not just coming forward. Any time that you have anything that you need, we are here for each other. We are family, and it's important for us to always be available to help each other whenever there is a need. If you have any of those needs or anything else, do come forward as we stand and sing.